Okay, while we're feasting our eyes there on Mr. Handsome, Tall, Dark, and Woohoo, that's Diana Palmer's Unleashed. And I didn't see it till a few minutes ago, but this is absolutely true what it says. A suspenseful, passionate, and emotionally charged story of love and danger from fresh fiction. And it's great. You'll want to read this book. See how many points of light I have to share? You want to read this book. I'm going to read you the back, then we're going to start in on the points of light because we're going to have lots of points of light to share on this book. And I do have Halloween books to share with you, but not tonight, but in the future. She vowed to never trust another man until she met him. A passionate, new, long, tall Texan romance from New York Times bestseller Diana Palmer. Chancey Lang knows how to run. She's been doing it since the day she fled her abusive childhood home to save her and her younger brother's lives. That was the same day she decided never to let herself depend on anyone again, or anyone else, especially men. Though she's mightily tempted to put her faith in her boss, ruggedly handsome, Texas Ranger Colter Banks. Far too long, Colter has been distracting himself with women. He knows that he'll never be fully satisfied him. But there's something about this pretty assistant, Clancy, that he simply can't resist. Something slowly but surely drawing every ounce of his attention. But is he falling for a woman who'll never let herself be caught? Fans of the second chance romances that triumph over tragedy and loss will enjoy this heartfelt story. Untamed and definitely will pull at your heartstrings, says the Harlequin junkie. And it's true, it does pull at your heartstrings. I'm going to read you the first little bit here that is inside the cover. Then we're going to probably start in with the points of light. So take a deep seat. To the brave men and women in all branches of law enforcement who serve throughout our country as peace officers and who risk their lives daily to protect us from harm, and to our people in all branches of the military who serve it around the world with honor and dedication, with love and thanks. Dear readers, you can probably tell that I have tremendous respect and admiration for the Texas Ranger Division of the Texas Department of Public Safety. I've written many books that feature them. Unleashed is the newest of my novels to feature a Texas Ranger as a hero. Colter Banks, who has cameos in many of my stories over the years, Clancy's Colter's assistant in the cold case office, is eccentric and sweet. I hope you like her. He doesn't. Lots of laughs. I have dedicated this book to the brave men and women of law enforcement and to our military. My great-grandfather was a deputy, a U.S. Marshal back in the early part of the 20th century. My husband's best friend is a former Sheriff's Department homicide detective and still serves as a volunteer sheriff deputy. When I was a teenager, we played penny ante poker. My best friend, who had a lieutenant of detectives with the Atlanta Police Department. When I was a newspaper reporter, 16 years' worth, I spent most of my time around the people in law enforcement. I gained great respect for them. I covered many news stories in my county and surrounding counties. I'm especially fond of the Cornelia Police Department, the Clarksville Police Department, and the Habersham County Sheriff's Office, all in the northeast Georgia. I have friends in all three places, brave men and women, past as well as present. I've also known a lot of people in the military, including members of my own family and group of friends. That job comes with hardship and grief, but we all have some gutsy people, men and women, who bear it all for all of us, all over the world. Big hugs, guys and gals. I hope you enjoy this book. I like the way it turned out. I hope you do as well. Love and hugs, and as always, I'm still your biggest fan, Diana Palmer. So, with that being said, let's dig right into the good old paper clips. We start on, I guess we're going to start right off on the first page, even though I didn't mark it, but I have a paperclip. Even a doctor couldn't read this handwriting, Clancy muttered to herself as she tried to decrypt a note jotted in the margin of the photocopied arrest record. What are you muttering about now? Colter Banks asked from the doorway. Colter was her boss, a Texas Ranger who worked cold cases for the San Antonio Office of Department of Public Safety. He was gorgeous, tall, narrow-hipped, with powerful long legs and broad shoulders. He had dark brown hair and liquid black eyes. Those eyes were glaring at her. She looked up with a disgusted expression on her oval face. She brushed away a strand of her dark wavy hair from her forehead. Pale gray eyes glared at him. "I can't read this." She waved the sheet at him. "If you'd like to resign," he'd offer, and looked over hopeful. "I can't resign. This is the only job available, and I have to eat," she grumbled. He took the sheet from her and frowned as he studied the note, and he placed it next to a certain charge on the wrap sheet. "Ha!" she exclaimed. He glanced at her. "What do you mean, ha?" "You can't read it either, can you?" she accused. He lifted his chin. "Of course I can read it," he scoffed. "I wrote it." "So what does it say?" He stared at it again. He had to puzzle it out, as if or she was never going to let him forget it. While he stared at the scribble and tried to make sense of it, the phone rang. He tossed the sheet back on the desk. "Phone." "Excuse," she said under her breath. He glared at her and he pulled his cell phone out of his holder. "Banks," he said. He listened. His face grew harder. He glanced at Clancy, who was still waving the sheet at him, and turned his back. "Yes, I can do that," he replied. "Sure, I'll stop on my way home. No problem. See you." He put the phone back and looked pointedly at his watch. "I've got to go see the assistant DA on a case I'm working, the Reed case from 5 years ago. We hear that Morris Duffy, who was suspected in his disappearance, may be getting out of prison early for good behavior, and soon," he remarked, missing the sudden worried expression on his assistant's face. "We could sure use a break in the case." He glanced at her again and then at his watch. "I better go on. Almost quitting time." Clancy got her composure back before his eyes fell on her face. "You still haven't translated this for me," she said, pointedly indicating the sheet. He glared at her. "Well, it's not my fault you can't write," she said belligerently. "I'll bet the teacher who tried to teach you cursive threw confetti on the last day of school and walked you all the way to the school bus." He glared at her harder. "I can write cursive just fine, thank you." "Then what does it say?" she persisted. "I could read it if I wanted to," he retorted. "How am I supposed to type up this report if I don't even know what you've written?" she asked reasonably. "If they question me about it, I'll tell them that you had a senior moment," he said with a deadpan expression. "I'm 23, not 80, she huffed. "I thought you were 22. "I was until last November, just after I came to work for you," she said. "Birthdays come once a year. You don't stay the same age forever." He didn't react to that snarky comment. He slid his white Stetson over one eye. "If anyone calls, I'll be out until tomorrow." "If they call, they'll call you, not me," she pointed out. "You have that phone fixed, that antique thing that attached to a wall," he pointed out. "I have a cell phone," she said defensively. "Does it have anything except numbers on it?" he asked with a sarcastic smile. She glared at him. "I'm going to get a really fancy smartphone as soon as I pay off my new yacht," she said belligerently. He turned away before she saw the smile. "Okay, naturism. Have a good night." "I am not a naturism." "A likely story," he muttered on his way out. "I'll bet my badge you don't even know what a naturism is." "I do so," she called after him. When he was out of sight, she pulled out the pocket dictionary of her drawer and looked it up. It was a flower. Well, maybe he didn't dislike her as much as he seemed to. She wondered at the irony because the meaning of her real name was the same as that of the nickname he stuck her with. She doubted if he paid any attention to her name on the job application. It had been, after all, the department's interviewer who had hired her for the job. She glanced at the sheet. Still she couldn't read it, and put it in her desk drawer. Tomorrow, she promised herself. She'd pin him down tomorrow and make him take a crack at it. Meantime, she'd type up the reports that she could read. That was page 12, 11, 10, and 9. Okay, next paperclip is page 34, so we do skip forward a little bit. "Where's the perp now?" "In prison somewhere," he said. "His father's dead, victim of a hit and run, not long after the son went to prison. No witnesses. The driver was never found." Banks was frowning. "That's a lot of turmoil in one household," he mentioned. "Yes, it is. They seemed well adjusted except for the boy on drugs, but the neighbors said a rough crowd used to hang out there during the day. The babysitter was even afraid of 'em. She usually took the 3-year-old to her house to avoid 'em. A missing grandfather, a dead father, a victim of a hit and run, a man sent to prison for assault on his 3-year-old half-brother and stepsister." He pursed his chiseled lips. "If I wrote soap operas, this would be the appeal to me." The detective laughed. "I guess it sounds that way. When's the boy due to get out of prison?" Page 35. He's been a model prisoner, apparently, the detective said sarcastically. He may even get an early release. It depends on the parole board. They're meeting this month. Can you keep me informed? The detective gave him an odd look. Can't your assistant do that? He asked. Banks laughed. Sure, of course she can. He didn't even question that strange wording. By the way, Assistant D.A. Tarnell Farley is familiar with the case, the detective added. He's a invested interest in it. He was prosecuting attorney when Duffy was sentenced, and Duffy's threatened to kill him when he gets out. Really like a soap opera, Banks commented drawly. Pretty much, he chuckled. How do you like working for the Texas Rangers? The detective added. It's a hard job, but I love it, Banks replied. It's your job, never dull. You can say that again, the detective chuckled. Never dull, just bordering on madness. That's the nature of the game. Thanks for your time. Sure thing, anytime. Banks went out the door, gnawing on the old man's disappearance. He wondered if the boy on drugs knew more about Reed's disappearance than he let on. He also wondered if the boy might have had a motive for killing the old man. It was something he needed to check into. His phone rang. He took it out of his holder on his belt and activated it. Banks, he said. Hi, you free for supper? Came a pleasant female voice. He chuckled. I guess so. I don't feel like really cooking. Where? I'm at Pete's Barbecue. My favorite place. Mine too. I'm tired of quick takeout, she added. We had a full day at the clinic, lots of emergencies. Mustn't let all those sick pooches and cats go without treatment, he agreed. Absolutely. See you in a few. He hung up. His sister Brenda worked for the local veterinary practice. She loved animals. Banks was fond of cats, but he didn't like dogs. Brenda had kept one at her apartment until she moved. The new apartment didn't allow pets. It had broken her heart to give up her Sheltie. She didn't find it a new home, though. He had a pet of his own, a fluffy red Maine Coon cat. His pet was huge, weighing over 16 pounds. If he had to go out of town, Miss Kitty was boarded at the veterinary hospital where Brenda worked. That was page 36. Moving forward. Page 40 and 41. I was thinking about that guy who groped Clancy in the office and got shot in the foot accidentally. She grimaced. She should have had him arrested and prosecuted, she said hotly. Honestly, what sort of man would do such a thing like that in a public office? He got shot, he reminded her. Pity he didn't hit anything worse than his own toe, she muttered. He was surprised at her vehemence. She wasn't usually so passionate about these things. She caught that expression. You're not a woman, so you wouldn't understand, she said after a minute. Men can be frightening when they're aggressive. I don't know Clancy very well, but I overheard our minister say something to her after service one day, something about not all men being animals. That was even before she got groped on the job. He frowned. The wording was unusual. He heard the terminology many times over his year in law enforcement, usually in conjunction with charges of rape or assault involving women. Now he was curious. What had happened to Clancy to provoke such a comment from the pastor? Not that it was any of his business. She did a fairly good job, and she was useful. Past that, he never noticed her. Page 42. The next day at lunchtime, Clancy was busy converting old paper files into computer ones, in between answering the phone and wolfing down a homemade deviled ham sandwich. A thermos full of sweetened coffee with cream sitting beside her lunch. Banks had been out of the office all morning, so she'd gotten a lot of work done. She looked up and heard Banks close the door and come down the steps. The assistant district attorney on the bank robbery case last week wants to talk to you. I left his number on your desk, she said, and one of the detectives at the SAPD needs the number of the witness you spoke to about his assault case. He picked up the paper on the desk and glowered down through the door to her small office. I can't read this, he muttered. Page 43. Look who's talking now about bad handwriting, she said, exasperated. She got up from her desk in the next room and went to his. She took the paper out of his hands and printed every single word on the page. She handed it back to him. If that's not legible enough, I can try crayons, she added blandly. He glared at her through his narrowed lids. Isn't your coffee getting cold? If we had a microwave oven in here, I wouldn't have to use a thermos, she pointed out. Great idea. Why don't you go talk to the lieutenant and tell him that why we need one, he asked. Better yet, why don't you bring yours to work? She stared at him. I don't own a microwave oven. Everybody owns a microwave oven. I even have one, he said. Well, I don't. She turned and went back into her office, aware of her hurt pride. She didn't have a lot of things that most people did. Times were hard. She and her little brother Tad had to live on what she made, and even though it was a good salary for work, it didn't cover any luxury at all. She and Tad dressed out of the thrift shop. She made her lunch and had to scrape up enough for Tad's lunches at school. She only worked for Banks because this office was within 2 blocks of the house that Morse now owned, where she and Tad lived. She worked for Cal Hollister up until she wound up here with this infuriating lawman. She missed Cal. He was the best boss any woman could have asked for, polite, grateful for work she did, full of praise and encouragement. She glanced at Banks, who was on the phone now, and thought how she'd love to trade him for Cal. The problem was this office was where Cal worked was way downtown, about 2 miles from her home. She couldn't afford to buy even an old used car, much less afford insurance and upkeep and gas to run it. Her legs were in great shape, even if her lungs weren't, so she could walk to work. She could also walk Tad to school every day and over to pick him up afterward after the school program for children of working parents. She wasn't Tad's parent, but she was responsible for him, legally responsible. Cal had helped her with that. He helped her with a lot of things. Ungrateful wench, she muttered and under her breath as she finished the last of the cooling coffee. Naturism, he countered. Will you stop calling me that? She exclaimed. I am not a naturism, and I'll bet you don't even know what it means, she added, throwing his own comment from the other day back at him. He laughed. She put up her thermos, threw her trash into the can underneath the desk, and went back to work on the files. She never put her whole name on the employment application she filled out at the Department of Public Safety, under whose umbrella the Texas Rangers operated, so Banks didn't know her whole name. Wouldn't be taken back to know what her second given name was and its definition. The thought amused her. I have to go over to the sheriff's office to see about a case I'm working, he said from the doorway. He frowned. That was page 44. Here comes 45, 45, and 47, and 48. 45. What were you doing at the Army recruiting office? He asked out of the blue. His fingers faltered on the computer keyboard and made a mess that she had to undo. Who said I was there? She asked uneasily. My sister, Brenda, he replied. Oh. She knew Brenda from church. She liked her. It wasn't Brenda's fault that she had an Attila Hun here for a brother. Well, he persisted. She looked up into the curious black eyes. She averted her own. She couldn't handle meeting that glittery gaze very often. It unsettled her. I was thinking about the benefits, she said absently. You have benefits here, he said shortly. Insurance, retirement, the whole bundle, besides which you don't have to carry a rifle to shoot people. She flushed. She wasn't going to tell him that she'd never get in the Army with her health problems. It had been a whim. When Morse got out, and she might very soon, she and Tad would be on the streets, because there was no way she'd agree to live under the same roof with her stepbrother. Besides being afraid of him physically, she was afraid of what retribution he might want to exact from her and her little brother. Morse was vindictive. Clancy's testimony had put him in jail for 6 years. He wasn't going to forgive her for that, no matter how nice he sounded in that letter he wrote her right after Ben died. Anyway, that had been years ago. I could learn to carry a rifle, she muttered. And shoot people? Page 47. I guess we're going to read until page 47. She drew in a breath and shrugged. They have clerks and stuff in the Army, and I could do that, she said. Maybe you could, but what a recruiter tells you and what you actually have to do are 2 totally different things. Like you know, she said irritably. I do know, he replied. I went into the Army at the age of 18. They promised me sunny California. I ended up in Afghanistan learning to speak Farsi and shoot people. She flushed. Oh, sorry. He cocked his head and frowned. If you don't like it here, you can always go back to work for Hollister, he pointed out. He even looked hopeful. I can't walk that far. He blinked. Are we having the same conversation? I can't walk all the way downtown and back every day, she repeated. I live 2 blocks from here, so I can walk to work. You worked for Hollister for 4 years, he pointed out, having read it in her employment application. Yes, when he was in an office the next street over before he got promoted to captain, she pointed out. Now he works downtown. You can get cabs to work, or the bus. I can't afford cabs, and the bus doesn't come near my house. He studied her unconsciously. He noticed for the first time that her clothes weren't new. She was neat and clean, but pretty much wore 3 different outfits to work and changed around the shirts and jeans. She had an old ratty jacket that she wore, and it was cool as if it was today. Autumn was chilly even in San Antonio, which was far enough south that the palm trees grew and thrived all over it. I should sign up tomorrow and let you replace me with some lazy man who can't even spell, she muttered, uneasy at his long silence and curious stare. He already tried that. There weren't any male applicants for the job. There had been 4 women who applied for it, 3 of whom were dressed like women who occupied street corners. Hence, Clancy. Men don't like dark basements, he said. I don't know why not, she said, ignoring him. Don't men like caves? She looked around at the dark paneling and lack of light fixtures. This would surely qualify. He wouldn't laugh. He would not laugh. He turned and chuckled into a cough. I'll be back in an hour or so if anybody comes looking for me. If it's somebody from the mounted unit, I'll send them right along. His high cheekbones took a faint ruddy color. I did not steal his horse, he said indignantly. I appropriated it in a pursuit of fugitive. I never said you stole it, she replied, her eyes twinkling, but he did. We straightened it out. She pursed her lip. Did you really? I understand that he loves to park his horse right in front of any car any time he sees you near his post. I'm sure it isn't deliberate. She laughed softly. Oh, I'm sure, she drawled. He shoveled his hat down over his thick, dark brown hair. I'm leaving. I noticed. Page 46, 47, and 48. He went on and actually slammed the door behind him. Clancy fell into gales of laughter. Okay. We're going to read to page 52 tonight and call it a night. Because I'm going to actually try to work out, so Lord help us all. Page 50. They turned the corner and there was Banks talking to an ununiformed officer on the sidewalk, his big black SUV parked at the curve. Clancy hesitated. She started to nudge her little brother back the other way, but it was too late. Banks had already spotted them. He said something to the uninformed officer, who nodded and started off down the street. Hi, Mr. Banks, Tad said with a big smile. Coulter's eyebrows lifted in a silent question. I saw you on TV on the news. Sis talks about you all the time, Tad volunteered. Clancy went red as a beet. I talk about work, she interjected hastily. I want to be a Texas Ranger when I grow up and catch criminals, Tad added. Coulter smiled down at the boy. Do you? Sis got me a book about the Rangers. Do you really have to ride horses sometimes to chase the bad guys? Coulter nodded. Yes, we do. Sometimes we're involved in cases where we go into the brush country pursuit, and you can't take a car in those places. That was page 50. Here's 51. We've been to the movies, Tad said. Sis saves up so we can go once a month. Coulter glanced at Clancy, who looked as if she wanted to go through the pavement. Odd reaction, he thought. We should get moving, she prompted her little brother. It's pretty cold out here, Coulter said, noting her lack of a jacket. The boy had on one that, while clean, was obviously second-hand. Come on, I'll drive you home. That isn't, Clancy began to quickly because she didn't want her boss to see her painful poverty in which they lived. But Tad interrupted her. That would be great. Do you have a police radio in your vehicle, and does it have one of those blue lights and a siren? Coulter chuckled. He liked the boy's enthusiasm. Yes, I do, and a laptop that connects to the internet as well. Wow, Tad exclaimed, all eyes and enthusiasm. Coulter led the way to the SUV. You can ride shotgun, Clancy told Tad. I'll just climb in the back. Coulter was puzzled by her behavior. At the office she was all mouth and sarcasm. Here, out of the office, she was shy, introverted, and hardly spoke. He had put Tad up to the passenger seat. After he moved his things out of the way, started to reach for the seat belt, but Tad already had it in place. Cal said, I must always put on my seat belt every time I get in a car. Tad explained. Cal? He asked. Cal Hollister. He's my friend, he said proudly. I know Hollister. He's a good guy, Coulter agreed. Watch your hands. He closed the door and went around to climb in under the steering wheel. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Clancy was strapped in also, but staring out the window as if she felt trapped. Okay, he said as he started the SUV. Somebody direct me. It's on Oak Street, Clancy volunteered reluctantly. Number 241. There's a 911 sign on the lawn beside the mailbox. He nodded and pulled out into the street. Beside him was Tad, looking at everything, plying with him with questions, and Clancy was grateful because she was unsettled with her boss. She could disguise it at work, but it seemed very different outside the office, almost uncomfortable. She didn't want him to see where they lived. It wasn't just the poverty of it, it was the address. What if he remembered that from his cold case? Her grandfather had lived there before he vanished without a trace. She almost panicked, and then she realized that if she got out of Tad of the SUV very quickly, they could thank him and rush inside. He'd probably forget the address at once, then he wouldn't have to see what miserable conditions they endured here. Coulter drove, wondering why the address seemed so familiar. Perhaps he was remembering from the job application, he thought. He only scanned it when she was hired and not very closely. Strange to have an address click in his mind. That usually only happened when he was working a case. He dismissed the thought and concentrated on Tad's questions. Okay. Well, this is a small little page, so we can cover page 57, which is good. So there's no reason to be embarrassed about where and how you live, he added softly. His lean hand moved to her short, wavy dark hair and pushed it back a strand that had fallen near her eyes. She swallowed hard and moved back a step, flushing because she knew that he'd taken it the wrong way and that she'd retreated. She couldn't help it. She was afraid of men because of what Morris had done to her. It wasn't rational, and she knew that Banks would never hurt her. It was instinctive. She ground her teeth together and looked tormented. He frowned. He was remembering the overbearing man who shot himself in the foot trying to grope her. She had her arms wrapped around her chest, and she looked as if she was being tortured to death. He also recalled what Brenda had told him, what her pastor had said to her at church. "It's a lot of responsibility that you have here," he said. After a minute of keeping his voice low, she nodded. She drew in a long breath. At least he hadn't blown up when she backed away. "I love my brother. I love my sister. She's 10 years younger than me. I was responsible for her after our mother died. I know what it's like." It was a moment of shared experience. We're going to pick up tomorrow on page 63, and we'll read for a little bit tomorrow. But that's a good start. And as you can tell, it's going to get a wonderful rating. You don't want to miss this. Stay tuned. Remember to keep your social distance. Wash your hands. When you can't wash your hands, use your hand sanitizer at all times. Wear your mask. And most importantly, stay safe. Stay well. God bless. Wish you the best.